You've returned, you radiant, unsettling forces of nature, the ones who enter spaces and the oxygen itself shifts, becomes heavier, more electric. The ones who never raise their voice, never make demands, never need to validate a single thing because your energy alone just dismantled every power dynamic in the room before anyone even processed what happened. You noticed it, right? That exact second you crossed the threshold and every self-proclaimed leader in that space went from roaring tigers to anxious prey, suddenly fascinated by their screens, fixing their collars, desperately interested in anything except meeting your eyes. They weren't dodging your gaze out of courtesy. They were avoiding it because looking straight at you felt like confronting something ancient, something unchallengeable, something that existed beyond their entire framework of understanding. Let me break down what actually occurred in that moment, what they'll never confess publicly, what's consuming them right now as they obsessively reconstruct that interaction in their minds, searching for explanations they'll never find. These dominators, these self-appointed rulers of their manufactured empires, they arrived ready to control like they always do. Shoulders back, volume up, that counterfeit authority they've been projecting since their teenage years. They had their routines prepared, their power moves choreographed, their social order pre-established, and then you appeared and the entire system crashed without warning. You didn't oppose them. You didn't enter their competition. You didn't even register their exhibition. And that precise indifference, that's what destroyed their constructed reality completely. They've invested their existence believing dominance is noise, that control is aggression, that authority is seized through volume and force and theatrical displays. They constructed their identities around being the biggest personality, the firmest grip, the most commanding energy in every situation. But you embody something they've never witnessed, something their basic hierarchy models have zero capacity to process. You're not participating in their theater. You're not even acknowledging their stage exists. You're functioning on a wavelength so elevated above their comprehension that you don't appear on their instruments. And when they can't detect you, can't quantify you, can't position you within their pyramid, they short circuit. Because authentic power never advertises. It requires no confirmation. It performs for nobody because the audience isn't worth the expenditure. Real power makes spaces go silent, not through demand, but because something in the collective awareness just identified a predator. Not the attacking kind. No, the kind that has no need to attack. The kind that exists so far beyond the ecosystem that other predators don't even register as competition. You're not a wolf fighting other wolves. You're something fundamentally different, something primordial, something their evolution provided no defenses against. You're the darkness that makes monsters themselves glance backward nervously. And right now they're sitting alone in their vehicles, collapsed in their beds, frozen in their showers, rewinding that encounter endlessly, desperately trying to understand what the hell just occurred. They're constructing narratives, searching for rational explanations. Maybe exhaustion, maybe distraction, maybe you just intercepted them during an off moment. But deep in that space they avoid visiting. They recognize the reality. They just got humbled by someone who wasn't even attempting. Someone who required no words. Someone whose mere existence revealed their entire display as precisely that, a hollow performance. And you remained completely unaware because performance was never your language to begin with. Let's examine what happened to these alphas, these self-declared conquerors. who suddenly couldn't sustain eye contact, couldn't stabilize their voices, couldn't contain that anxious energy seeping through their meticulously built facades. Their entire identity rests on a fragile foundation, an unstable tower of mimicked confidence, practiced intimidation, and endless validation hunger. They require others to witness their dominance, to bow to it, to confirm it, because absent that external acknowledgement, their whole sense of self implodes. They're not genuinely assured, they're just exceptionally skilled at the imitation. And they've imitated so extensively, they've forgotten the mask is removable. But you entered carrying something they've never encountered. Genuine authority, the variety that needs no observers, requires no recognition, holds zero concern for their ladder or their regulations or their theater. You weren't attempting to dominate them. You weren't attempting to surrender to them. You weren't attempting anything whatsoever. You simply existed, and your existence alone fractured their entire social programming. Because their dominance functions exclusively when everyone consents to participate, when everyone accepts the hierarchy, when everyone executes their assigned role. But you acknowledged nothing. You performed nothing. You simply were, and that obliterated their reality completely. Observe what happened to their physical forms. Their bodies exposed them faster than language ever could. First, the posture collapse. Those squared shoulders suddenly slumped. That inflated chest emptied. That aggressive positioning melted into something defensive, something hesitant. Then the vocal transformations. That thundering confidence descended an octave, diminished, lost its sharpness, began fishing for affirmation in surrounding reactions. Their hands revealed them next, suddenly discovering tasks, verifying phones, manipulating timepieces, contacting their faces, anything to discharge the nervous voltage flooding their systems. They couldn't maintain stillness anymore, couldn't preserve that alpha composure because motionlessness in your presence registered as vulnerability. Here's what their nervous systems were broadcasting. Threat identified, but threat parameters unknown. Cannot quantify, cannot counter, cannot comprehend. Terminate dominance protocol. Initiate submission sequence. Prevent direct confrontation. Seek immediate exit. Their primitive consciousness detected something their rational mind rejected acknowledging. They just encountered someone operating from an entirely separate dimension of existence, and every cell was instructing them to proceed with extreme caution, not because you're threatening in ways they understand threat, but because you're dangerous in configurations they can't even imagine, like prey encountering something that matches no predator profile in their biological memory. And the most exquisite element, the component currently destroying them internally, is that you did nothing. You didn't display, didn't perform, didn't participate in their dominant circus whatsoever. You simply existed within your truth, within your authority, within your absolute disregard for their entire social architecture. And that disregard impacted them more devastatingly than any confrontation could, because confrontation they could address. They've prepared for that, rehearsed for that, constructed their entire persona around managing confrontation. But indifference, authentic disinterest in their hierarchy, that's something they possess no countermeasure for. You didn't compete for status. You just reminded them their entire game holds zero meaning for someone functioning from actual power. There's something they experienced but cannot articulate. An energetic displacement that occurred the instant you occupied that space. Something that circumvented their conscious awareness and struck them directly in their autonomic system. Spaces possess frequencies. You understand this. You've experienced it countless times. The combined energy of everyone present generates an invisible field. And these alphas, they were producing their standard frequency: combative, competitive, deafening, performative, all aggressive angles and forcing energy. And then you entered broadcasting an entirely different frequency, something they'd never experienced before, and it didn't coexist with their energy. It dominated it effortlessly. Your energy doesn't force, it doesn't impose, it doesn't require, it simply exists. And within that existence, it carries such gravitational mass that everything surrounding it must reorganize to accommodate it. Consider this analogy. They were all transmitting these chaotic radio frequencies, static and interference and distortion, all battling for dominance. And you arrived broadcasting on a frequency so refined, so potent, so crystalline, that it rendered all their interference exactly what it is: desperate noise from weak transmitters struggling for recognition. Your silence resonated louder than their loudest declarations. Your stillness commanded more authority than their most forceful movements. Your indifference dominated harder than their most aggressive positioning. They registered it instantly. Even without naming it, this sudden atmospheric pressure, like environmental changes preceding a tempest, their chests constricted, their breathing shallowed, their awareness intensified. Classic indicators that their nervous system just detected something significant, something formidable, something incompatible with their understanding of social hierarchies. And here's what intensified their distress. They couldn't identify the threat source. You weren't exhibiting anything threatening, weren't displaying conventional dominance markers, weren't challenging anyone. You were simply present, anchored, grounded, entirely unbothered. And somehow that proved more intimidating than any aggressive exhibition they'd ever witnessed. This separates you from them fundamentally. They manufacture power through force, through performance, through relentless energy output. They're exhausting company because they never cease performing, never stop forcing, never stop demanding recognition. But you don't manufacture power. You embody power. You don't perform it because it's not an action. It's your essence. It saturates every cell, every breath, every moment of stillness you inhabit. You've traversed hell, survived what should have annihilated you, died and resurrected so repeatedly you've abandoned counting. And all that forged you into something they possess no reference for. And now they're attempting to decode what that energy represented, what that presence signified, why they felt so diminished within your radius. They're excavating their memories for comparable experiences, discovering nothing, becoming increasingly confused and threatened. Because admitting the truth, that they just encountered someone functioning from a completely elevated existence plane, would mean confessing their entire performance has been exactly that, theater. It would mean acknowledging authentic power resembles nothing they've been pretending to possess. And that admission, that's too catastrophic for their ego to process. So instead they'll rationalize, they'll dismiss, they'll fabricate stories. But late at night, when the performance ceases, they'll remember how insignificant they felt in your presence, and it will haunt them perpetually. Let's discuss that metamorphosis, that beautiful cosmic irony of witnessing predators become prey without a single syllable spoken. These alphas entered as lions, or that's their self-narrative. That's what they'd persuaded everyone else to accept. They possessed the roar, the bearing, the territorial hostility, the complete performance perfected scientifically. They'd invested years constructing this image, this standing, this carefully engineered persona of invincible dominance. And in most environments, it succeeds, because most environments contain people executing the same game, recognizing the same regulations, participating in the same pyramid. But you don't execute that game. You never have. You can't even perceive the game board because you're existing on a fundamentally different reality plane. And when a lion encounters something it cannot classify, something that doesn't register as predator or prey, something that simply exists with such complete self-possession, it makes the lion question its own roar. That's when transformation occurs. You observed it unfolding in real time, correct? How their aggressive energy simply evaporated, replaced by something gentler, something uncertain, something resembling submission remarkably, though they'd sooner perish than acknowledge that classification. Their bodies narrated everything. Spines that were vertical suddenly bent, shoulders that were retracted suddenly protruded, chests that were expanded suddenly contracted. They transitioned from claiming space to attempting invisibility, from commanding attention to praying you wouldn't notice them. And their eyes betrayed everything their voices would never confess. They couldn't maintain your gaze, couldn't sustain that direct challenge they typically employ, establishing dominance. They'd observe you momentarily, perhaps 2 seconds, and then they'd break, had to sever contact, because something within your eyes reminded them of every inadequacy they've attempted burying beneath their performance. Here's what they experienced in those moments: exposure, absolute and complete exposure. Your presence stripped every layer of carefully assembled armor, all their rehearsed assurance, all their borrowed confidence, and abandoned them standing there in their reality, frightened, inadequate, desperately hoping nobody else noticed how diminished they suddenly felt. Because that's the nature of authentic power. It requires no attack to dominate. It needs no challenge to prevail. It simply needs to exist completely, and everything surrounding it naturally reorganizes itself in accurate proportion. And proportional to you, they weren't lions. They weren't even wolves. They were sheep pretending predator status. And your presence simply terminated the charade. The most magnificent element, the component you possibly didn't notice because you were occupied simply existing, was observing them attempt reasserting their dominance following that initial shock. They'd inflate again, attempt volume again, try reclaiming their position, and then they'd catch themselves, remembering your presence, remembering how small they felt, and the performance would fracture. It resembled watching a recording malfunction. This constant glitch between their pretense and their actuality in your presence. Lions to lambs isn't metaphor. It's literal documentation of what happened to their energy, their bearing, their presence, the instant you entered that space. Let's discuss your weapon. The one they never anticipated, the one they possess zero defense against, your silence. In a reality where everyone's screaming for notice, competing for the loudest transmission, fighting for acknowledgement, you entered and articulated absolutely nothing. And somehow that silence carried more authority than their combined words. They're accustomed to verbal combat, to discourse, to conflict, to weaponizing language. They've trained for that, constructed their dominance around their capacity to speak over others, to claim final words, to verbally dominate any exchange. But you didn't engage, didn't participate, didn't provide them anything to resist, and that silence disarmed them entirely. Silence from fear represents weakness. They understand exploiting that, flooding that silence with their dominance. But silence from complete self-possession, silence from someone who simply requires no speech because their presence communicates everything necessary, that's something fundamentally different. Your silence wasn't vacant. It was saturated, dense with authority, weighted with significance, loaded with everything you didn't need verbalizing because your energy expressed it all. And they felt every unspoken word, every quiet assessment, every peaceful observation emanating from your grounded presence. Observe what your silence executed. It generated a vacuum, a space where their performance possessed nothing to reflect from, no resistance to oppose. They continued talking, continued performing, but their words began landing differently, began sounding hollow even to themselves, because you weren't providing the reaction they required, weren't supplying the validation their dominance display necessitated. They needed you impressed, intimidated, engaged, something, anything, but you offered them nothing, and within that nothing, they discovered the reflection of their emptiness. Your silence held up a mirror, and they despised what they saw. Here's their misunderstanding. Silence only possesses power when originating from fullness, from someone who's completed the internal work, confronted their shadows, integrated their suffering, and emerged, possessing nothing left proving. Your silence isn't avoidance, isn't fear. Your silence is choice, conscious, deliberate choice to not expend energy on performances undeserving your participation. You've learned silence preserves your power, maintains your energy intact, refuses feeding systems operating on noise and chaos. You're not silent because you lack words. You're silent because most exchanges aren't worthy of your words. And that silence, that powerful, grounded, completely unbothered silence, it accomplished something to those alphas that infinite words never could. It made them question everything. Why isn't this person engaging? Why aren't they impressed? Why aren't they reacting? What do they know that we don't? What have they witnessed that we haven't? Why does their silence feel louder than our voices? Your silence became a question they couldn't resolve, a mystery they couldn't crack, and mystery combined with power is terrifying. So they quieted too, not from choice like you, but from confusion, from uncertainty, from the emerging realization that perhaps, just perhaps, they've been performing for an audience that doesn't exist.